The news begins with updates on the hashtag #EndBadGovernance protest. Several rights activists in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, have vowed to go on with the #EndBadGovernance protests, which have rocked the nation in the last 4 days. Now, some of them spoke to newsmen in Abuja, saying despite much anticipation over the presidential broadcast to citizens, President Bola Tinubu failed to address concerns which sparked the protest. Idong Joseph completes this report.
After 3 days of demonstrations across the country, the much-awaited presidential address to the nation was finally delivered. While President Bola Tinubu's national broadcast to the nation was expected to address the growing concerns of the protesters, some rights activists say that the president showed no empathy in his broadcast. They say that the policies and programs highlighted by the president in his speech continue to favor the nation's political elites without due regard for the poor and vulnerable.
The claim by President Tinubu that our protests are driven by a political agenda to tear Nigeria apart is nothing but an attempt to call a dog a bad name so that it can be hanged. It is a gross misrepresentation of the obvious facts and has become the economic reality of all Nigerians. These protests have been largely faceless and leaderless.
To further confirm that President Tinubu's disconnection from the masses borders on psychopathy, the president started ruling out economic figures in the typical neoliberal attitude that prioritizes some abstract economic growth over the immediate welfare needs of the people. This is the typical attitude of Nigerian leaders in the past, which our generation is rejecting, that you will not reel out economic figures to us while not connecting it to our present immediate needs.
Some of them also raised alarm over the continuous harassment by security operatives, describing the situation as unfortunate.
The president has tried to make us look like we are the violent ones. But every day since we've been organizing, the violence has been incited by the Nigerian police, the DSS, the soldiers, and the civil defense. And we are saying that as Nigerians, we should not have to beg, we should not have to explain ourselves before we express our right to protest.
People complain about looters, those who came to disrupt the protests. These are products of this establishment. Because as long as you keep having poor people around you, then even you are not safe. An average hungry man is a potential criminal.
We are not afraid of bullets. We are not afraid of tear gas. We are afraid of life without purpose. A life without hope, and that is what our leaders have given us.
They described the president's speech as a disappointment to their expectations and called on citizens to come out en masse to continue the protests. In Abuja for News Central, I am Idong Joseph.
That was Idong Joseph, News Central correspondent from the capital city of Nigeria in Abuja. Now, Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka has said that President Bola Tinubu's nationwide address on Sunday failed to address the attacks on the hashtag #EndBadGovernance protesters by security agencies. Professor Wole Soyinka made the observation in a statement on Sunday following Tinubu's address to the nation. Soyinka said in listening to the address, his major concern was the continuing failure of government in protest management. He condemned the use of tear gas and live bullets by security forces, saying that such entrenches a seemingly unbreakable cycle of resentment and reprisals. Now, according to the professor, hunger marches constitute a universal SOS not peculiar to the Nigeria and of course serve as summons to governance that a breaking point has been reached. He added that the tragic response to the ongoing hunger marches in parts of the nation and for which notice was served constitutes a retrogression that takes the nation even further back than the deadly culmination of the watershed and SARS protests. Still on the hashtag #EndBadGovernance protest, in the same vein, human rights lawyer Femi Falana has called on President Bola Tinubu to address the demands of the peaceful protesters. In a statement on Sunday, Falana said that the presidential speech delivered this morning fell short of addressing the key demand of the protesters, reversal of the policy of withdrawal of fuel subsidy. Falana said, speaking about the address that was given on Sunday, Now, while congratulating the protesters for drawing the attention of politicians who are eating in Abuja to the plight of millions of Nigerians who are hungry, Falana demanded the immediate and unconditional release of all protesters that were arrested and detained, saying that they had not committed any criminal offense. Falana also condemned the repression of the peaceful protesters while commiserating with all those who lost loved ones in the protest. He called on the government to set up commissions of inquiry to bring justice to those responsible for the reckless killings. Joining us on the news to give us updates on the ongoing protest in Abuja is News Central's correspondent, Emmanuel Bagudu. Emmanuel, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Good afternoon.
All right, good afternoon. Emmanuel, what is the situation over there in Abuja right now? This morning, we did see a bit of violence between the protesters and the police force who were supposed to be meant to protect them. What is the situation currently?
Well, the situation right now in Abuja is that the protesters have been sent back. All protests have been halted by police of any kind. Right now, there is no one that is currently protesting in Abuja because earlier in the morning, the protest started right from this particular spot where I am, as the Curfew area of the Abuja Municipal Area Council of the FCT, where we share videos of protesters carrying Russian flag, with leaves going up and down, but they were dispersed. As I speak to you, police officers, military officers are just surrounding this area in particular. They are patrolling this area in particular to make sure that these protesters don't come out. I was at the National Stadium this morning. There is no protester yet there. Of course, I just reported about the Gudu district area where police officers actually dispersed protesters with tear gas, despite the plea by the president for them not to be violent on the protesters. So as I speak to you, you can see right now police officers are just going around this particular axis to make sure that those particular Russians, the protesters were not, those guys carrying Russian flags didn't come out again. So that is the situation right now at the Karu and the Jinko area of the FCT.
All right, we do see the police vehicles moving around, but I want to also find out, do you think that we should be expecting more protesters coming out later in the day, or is that the final verdict? And is it allowed to disperse protesters and ask them not to protest? Are there any legal laws backing that, and what are the people saying about that?
Yes, we're looking at it from the angle of strategy. Looking at the body language of the police and the soldiers and the DSS this morning, they will not condone any protest in Abuja. That is what they are. That's what it looks like, because we just reported that 2 groups were dispersed. So, and the way they are patrolling is as if it's even war, as if there is a war in the FCT. So nothing is happening. Nothing is happening right now. But we're told that protests are happening, in corners where police just disperse them within seconds. So that's what's happening. So we're looking at it from after. Maybe the protesters are re-strategizing, trying to see how they can come out without, having to, have any fracas with the police. But right now, the police and the security agencies have halted all protests in Abuja.
All right, thank you so much, Emmanuel Bagudu, for giving us update from the nation's capital, Abuja, and please do stay safe. News Central will definitely be looking into that to see if there are any legal backings that allow for security forces to disperse protests and not allow protesters to come out. But in the meantime, let's go to more stories. Business activities are on standstill now in many areas within the Jos Bukuru metropolis following the 24-hour curfew imposed on the metropolis by Governor Caleb Mutfwang. Now, according to a press statement signed by his director of press, Gyang Bere, the curfew began and became necessary to forestall further breakdown of law and order in the state. News Central's Chizoba Anyowe quotes the governor as warning those planning to unleash further terror on innocent citizens to desist immediately or face the full wrath of the law. Joining us on the news now to give us updates on the situation in Jos is News Central's correspondent, Chizoba Anyowe. Good afternoon, Chizoba.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Now, Chizoba, we hear that the governor has imposed a 24-hour curfew. Just to clarify, is the curfew on all protesters or all businesses generally? And what is the reaction of the people?
Okay, well, yeah, the governor imposed the curfew yesterday evening, and of course to take effect from Sunday midnight, and it's still ongoing. And so it is basically on Jos Bukuru metropolis, and that is basically where you have the city center. Major activities go on here, and so it is both on the protesters and every citizen residing within this metropolis. So. If you can see behind me, this particular area, I am starting at Hill Station Roundabout, and it is a popular place. And so it is usually a beehive of activities around here. But today, it has become a shadow of its own because you can barely see cars from behind me. You just see a few people who are on essential duties like journalists, medical officers, and all those. And of course, the security operators. And so they have been everywhere to ensure that nobody comes out from anywhere to cause mayhem in the state. So that has been the situation. But off camera, the people I spoke with earlier, some of them hailed this development as a welcomed one so that you don't have to wait for an incident to occur before this decision is taken, So sometimes it's always good to have issues or problems prevented rather than talking about how to solve the situation when it has already happened. So I think that was what the governor thought about with security agencies before this curfew was actually imposed.
So, from what we understand, it seems as though people are, in the majority, pleased with the decision to impose a curfew. Isn't that affecting businesses or movements? The people are not complaining about the curfew, or they seem to cite it?
Definitely, it's affecting businesses and other activities in the state. But the major thing we should look at is the peace, the security of both lives and property. Because when you say, okay, no, let's allow businesses to go on, and then what happens when there's loss of lives and then properties are destroyed and then there's chaos in town, So I think that's why this came up. And despite the ill feeling some people may have because it has already grounded the activities for the day, and of course, no one even knows when this curfew will be lifted. But in the long run, all the people I spoke with, yes, they expressed displeasure that it had to come to this level. But at the end of the day, they still prefer that people are safe and things take their normal course.
All right, Chizoba, anyway, thank you so much for giving us an update from Jos.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're still watching the news. We go on a short break, and when we come back, more stories. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're still live with us on the news, and we're still giving you updates of the #EndBadGovernance protest that has been ongoing for 5 days now. Now, some residents of Nigeria's federal capital, Abuja, have expressed disappointment over the recent broadcast by President Bola Tinubu addressing the nation in regard to end bad governance demonstrations across the country. Now, they say the broadcast failed to address concerns raised by the citizens. Amadine Uyi reports.
It's been 4 days of protests around the country.
We are going to show the government how democracy is done.
Despite a clampdown by security operatives, Nigerians have remained defiant, saying the hardship being witnessed by citizens is unbearable. Many of them vow to continue the protests.
The protest will continue as long as I'm so. My name is Abdul Hamid, and I stand to be corrected.
Nigeria is in a state of comatose because what is happening in this country today is a starvation, not even hunger. Some people can barely eat.
If you come to the markets now, the cost of a bag of rice is 80 to 80,000, between 79 to 80 something thousand. And you are still claiming that you've removed or you've suspended duties on drugs, malaria drugs that mean that most massive, because Nigeria is an endemic environment to malaria. How many people can afford malaria drugs now? So most people are resolving to self-help of herbs and all that.
President Bola Tinubu, in an early morning broadcast, assured citizens that he is not insensitive to their cries. However, several residents of the federal capital expressed disappointment over the broadcast, saying it did not address issues raised by citizens.
I don't think that he really understands the reason why the youth are out on the streets. To me, it's just for him to admit, okay, I'm going to deal with this. For now, you give us a lot of time to still work, because we are not expecting him to do everything in one day. Neither are we expecting him to do any magic. But the few points that has been raised, how did he address it? Number one, that we want the subsidy, the fuel. That is the number one thing that is in.
Our president addressed people in normal way, but for us, the thing where our president don't do is not enough. But make our president still at work, because things is not easy for everybody now.
Now let's watch and see, because ever before Tinubu administration, the country have already collapsed. Let's see the God should touch the President Tinubu so that he can do what he promised Nigeria. That's the only thing.
To me, I would not really say his statement has really addressed the concerns of most Nigerians. I feel that is just the usual political statements that we've always heard.
With many of the protesters vowing to continue their demonstrations, it is hoped that they reach a compromise with government soon. In Abuja for News Central.
Now, operatives of the Department of State Services have allegedly arrested one of the leaders of the ongoing End Bad Governance protest, Michael Lenin, in the Federal Capital Territory. Lenin was picked up by the DSS around 2 a.m. on Monday this morning at his residence in the Apo area of the FCT. DSS was alleged to have raided his apartment and assaulted him during his arrest. And now to other news. The Joint Admissions and Matriculation Board, JAMB, has given all tertiary institutions in the country 1 month to disclose all admissions conducted outside its Central Admissions Processing System, CAPS, before 2017. Public Communication Advisor for JAMB, Dr. Fabian Benjamin, who disclosed this at a press briefing in Abuja on behalf of the board's registrar, Professor Ishak Oluyede, on Sunday, stated that the directive is aimed at enhancing transparency and fairness in the admissions process. Now, he said the decision marks the end of the condonment of illegal admissions window, which previously allowed institutions to incorporate unauthorized admissions into the system. Benjamin highlighted concerns over institutions colluding with candidates to falsify details for illegal admissions, which has led to fraudulent participation in the National Youth Service Corps, NYC.
The Minister of Education, who felt that it was not the fault of the candidate, that rather the candidate should not be punished for the offense of the institution. And he now gave a stern warning that going forward, any institution that is found to violate that provision will be sanctioned, even where the head of that institution at that time is no longer in office. Such a person will be called and prosecuted. But now, because of what is happening, we have announced repeatedly, we told the candidate don't accept any admission outside CAPS. But we discovered that even the candidate themselves are also part of the conspiracy. So we are announcing finally, so that in the event whereby anybody is found, we want to clear everything that is, whatever backlog that we have now. We'll look at what, by the time they make this submission, we'll look at the level of compliance. I told you we have something close to 1,000 in the past. We'll look at 1 million in the past. We'll see whether we are having that large number again. That will determine the next step that we'll take. But what I can assure you that going forward, after this opportunity, this window is given, we will not take any.
The federal government has issued a travel alert to its citizens in the United Kingdom due to heightened violence and disorder following recent riots. The travel alert was signed by the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Eche Abuode, on Monday. Violent protests erupted in towns and cities in Britain after 3 girls were killed and 10 people were injured in a knife attack at a children's dance class in Southport in northwest England last Monday. Now, following the development, the Nigerian government advised citizens in the UK to avoid political processions, protests, rallies and marches. They should also steer clear of crowded areas and large gatherings and remain vigilant and self-aware at all times. Now, remember the 17-year-old Kanuri child, Musa Zana Mustafa from Maiduguri, who developed an artificial intelligence platform dedicated to preserving the rich cultural heritage of the Kanuri people and the historical Kanem Borno Empire, as reported by News Central? Well, that young child has received substantial support from the Borno State government through the State Information and Communication Technology Development Agency. News Central's Umoru Kirawa tells us through the interesting story of the young talent in Borno.
Tell us a little bit of the history of the Kanuri people.
The history of the Kanuri people is rich and multifaceted, tracing back to ancient times and spanning several centuries.
The Kanuri Artificial Intelligence Platform, developed by the young Musa Zanna Mustafa, can now talk, an opportunity for the blind to also ask and listen to the rich Kanem Borno cultural heritage. Mustafa's initiative aims to ensure that the invaluable heritage of his community remains accessible to future generations in the digital age.
The government has done a lot. At first, they have given me a brand new HP laptop, and also they have given me they have offered an admission to me at the University of Maiduguri, studying computer engineering. They offered scholarship, a 2-year scholarship for me, which has made me very happy.
Center for Robotics and Artificial Intelligence Research is what the young child is engaged to spearhead for the benefit of the younger ones in Borno as the state recovers from insurgency.
In order to encourage him, we first provided a tool, working tool for him. And thereafter, we also felt it necessary when we had his story that, he tried admission 2 times and he couldn't get it. We encouraged him to go for it and will provide scholarship for him for 2 years.
The government was impressed with the talent of the young Mustafa in his quest for cultural sustainability.
I'm very much excited as he has been encouraged, and then I would like to commend and thank His Excellency Professor Babagana Umar Zulum for bringing forth an establishment, Borno State Information, Communication and Development Agency. This is the first time something as such has ever been done to Borno State.
The package aims to provide young Mustafa with the necessary tools and resources to realize his full potential and contribute to the advancement of AI in Borno State.
Borno has gone far in digital revolution. The last 4 years of the governor is Borno transformation. But this time around, e-governance will come on board. Everything will be e.
The talented young Mustafa narrates his ordeals of gaining admission lately and the challenge of spearheading the robotics and AI research unit of BIGDA.
I almost missed 1 exam, but most of the things we are doing at the exam, I've done it at home. I used my laptop to visit some online lessons. Thereby, I did my exam successfully. I would do as much as I can to bring an impact to my education.
Through interactive session and personalized feedback, learners worldwide can now embark on a journey to master the intricacies of the Kanuri people, fostering greater understanding and appreciation of cultural diversity. In Maiduguri for News Central, Umoru Kirawa.
This is still News Central now, and now to more stories. Mali said it was breaking diplomatic relations with Ukraine, accusing a senior Ukrainian official of having admitted Kiev's role in a heavy defeat Malian troops suffered in July. Now, Mali government spokesman Colonel Abdoulaye Maiga made this known in a statement that the government had been shocked to learn of remarks by Andriy Yusuf, spokesman for Ukraine's military intelligence agency. Members of the Russian mercenary group Wagner were among the casualties in the defeat, which happened in late July in the north of the country, and which Mali's military rulers have blamed on separatists and jihadists. Now, speaking on Ukrainian television, Yusuf said the whole world was aware that the rebels had received the necessary data that allowed them to carry out their operation against the Russian war criminals. Now, following weeks of anti-government protests, Kenyan President William Ruto dissolved the majority of the cabinet last month and introduced a vetting process for new ministers. Several nominees have already appeared before a parliamentary committee since Thursday and will conclude on Sunday. The parliamentary vetting, which began on Thursday, took place against the backdrop of public murmurs over integrity of some of the nominees. The retention of 6 persons who served in the cabinet dismissed on July 11, and the inclusion of opposition leaders in what is said to be a team of rivals. Now, at least one petition has been filed in a local court seeking to bar the 4 opposition members from taking their positions in the new cabinet, while the country's official anti-corruption body wrote a letter to Parliament opposing the appointment of one of the nominees it says is under investigation for corruption. Meanwhile, citizens have warned the Kenyan parliament against approving individuals implicated in corruption for appointment to the cabinet. Now, joining us on the news to discuss this development is Tele Nzomo, Program Officer at Siasa Place from Nairobi. Thank you so much, Tele, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, Tele, giving the warnings against including corrupt individuals, what would you say the criteria should be that the President Ruto would consider when selecting his new cabinet members?
I think he's already selected the new cabinet. Now the process is in Parliament, where now Parliament just has to approve. I think in as far as the criteria he was using, it was more of he was looking at the political nature of what's going on in the country. And I think that what he was doing was basically just trying to bring on board other parties, and more specifically ODM, which is the second biggest party in Parliament, and trying to ensure that he has, I guess, more support, especially considering how bad the demonstrations were. I think he's looking at himself from a political side, almost a way of ensuring the survival of his government. So the criteria he used was just trying to bring in the major parties together, at the same time also trying to deal with the issues that he may be having with his own party, and trying to deal with it. So it's been, his criteria has been very, very political, which I think is unfortunate. It should have been more about service delivery, but I don't think that was what he considered first.
All right. And what are the expectations from the Kenyan public regarding the new cabinet?
Right now, the expectations were that we would have a government, as I mentioned before, the issue of service delivery, having a cabinet that is delivering for the people. I think people wanted less politicians in the cabinet. They wanted to see more technocrats. They wanted to see people who had experience in the relative in the relative dockets or in the relative fields, but we didn't necessarily get that from the new cabinet, and what we are seeing is more of the political angle, as I was mentioning before. But the expectation from people is that there will be service delivery, there'll be less issues on corruption, but we'll see how that works with the new team.
All right. Also, how significant would you say the challenge of managing rivals in Parliament for President Ruto is? What are the strategies that he might employ to foster collaborations or mitigate the opposition?
Yeah, so far what he has done is to actually try and bring the opposition on board. As I mentioned that he has picked a number of cabinet secretaries from the ODM, which is Raila Odinga's party. That's the second largest party also in the National Assembly and in Parliament as a whole. So he's tried his best. He's brought them on board, I think, to reduce the amount of issues that he will face from the opposition. But there's still a number of political parties that refused to the call to join what he wanted to set up as a government of national unity. That's the Wiper Party, Jubilee Party, and other parties within Azimio. But I think by bringing on board ODM, I think he's put himself in a very strong position. I think a lot of the members of ODM will likely be working with or voting for government, even in Parliament. The other angle that he may have to deal with is the internal wrangles with his own party. Before the protests, there were already issues of falling out between the president and his deputy. So that is, I think, where he'll be really looking at. He'll be looking at more how does he try and deal with the people within his party who he may consider to be rebels.
All right. I think my final question will be, how will the composition of this new cabinet affect President Ruto's governance and his implementation of his policies, especially in light of the protests?
Interestingly enough, there are a number of people who he has appointed who, in the lead up to this process, were very much anti-government policy. One good example is the nominee to Treasury, John Badi. John Badi, who has been in Parliament now for quite a while, when he was in Parliament, was very vocal that he didn't think the policies that government were putting in board were the right policies. So it's now going to be interesting to see now these individuals who in the past were very much against government policy, who in the past were opposing William Ruto and opposing what William Ruto was saying. It's going to be interesting to see, are they still going to take that stand? Are we going to see them agree with the president, or rather work with the president in as far as the president's policies? Or are we going to now start seeing government coming on board and saying, okay, we accept that we had challenges, we accept that there's some policies, especially fiscal policies, regarding how much money we're spending, and now looking at bringing in new policies. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these new cabinet secretaries, especially the ones who are leading the economic dockets, a lot of them were, as I mentioned, were opposed to the president and to the policies that he's had so far.
All right, Tele Nzomo, Program Officer, Siasa, please, joining us from Nairobi. Thank you so much for giving us more insight into this development.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Moving on to more stories now. Rebels from the M23 movement have captured a border town in eastern DR Congo without a fight on Sunday, same day a ceasefire between DR Congo and neighboring Rwanda was meant to come into force. Ishasha, on the border with Uganda, was the latest town to fall to the majority ethnic Tutsi movement backed by Rwanda. Its capture comes a day after the fall of the nearby large town of Inyamilima, which locals say the M23 also took without resistance. Now, M23 has seized large swaths of territory in the Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu province since it launched an offensive at the end of 2021. Still on the news, moving on to World Wrap now, UK leader Keir Starmer has held an emergency response meeting after more far-right riots broke out across England over the murder of 3 children last week. The Prime Minister chaired the meeting, bringing together ministers and the police to discuss how to quell the violence that first broke out in Southport, northwest England on Tuesday. Now, police have arrested hundreds of people in towns and cities nationwide, with anti-immigration demonstrators and rioters facing off against police and counter-protesters, including groups of Muslims. Police have blamed the violence and supporters and associated organizations of the English Defence League an anti-Islam organization founded 15 years ago, whose supporters have been linked to football hooliganism. For more on this, I'm now joined by our international correspondent, Afia Hagen. Thank you so much, Afia, for joining us. All right, Afia, if you can hear me, can you tell us what the latest is on the rioting in England? Afia, apologies, could you unmute your device? I think we're having issues. Afia, are you there? Afia, can you hear me? All right, I think we have issues with Afia's audio. We're hoping that we can have her join us back to discuss the riot in the UK. All right, but in the meantime, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has tendered her resignation after fleeing the country after more than a month of deadly anti-government protests. The protest is said to have started due to jobs quota allocation to the family of war veterans in the country. Now, the protests began last month over governmental job quotas and have since expanded into nationwide unrest amid a crackdown by authorities. Now to business news. Nigeria's sovereign risk premium surged to an 8-month high, and its dollar bonds were some of the worst performing emerging market assets amid concerns that cost of living protests across the country could derail the government's economic reform plan. Now, on the other hand, the stock market recorded mixed performance as the Nigerian Exchange Limited depreciated last Thursday, the first day of the protest, and appreciated on the second day, Friday. The past week's unrest comes soon after violent protests had forced another African nation, Kenya, to scrap crucial measures introduced to raise budget revenue. Still in business, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has issued a public censure and the suspended fine of 3 million rand to state-owned utility, Eskom, for failing to comply with its debt listings requirement. Now, in a SENS announcement released on the 2nd of August, the JSE noted that as a state-owned entity and issuer of debt securities, Eskom has a continued obligation to adhere to these requirements. Now, in 2020, the JSE implemented specific rules for state-owned entities, including policies on the disclosure and treatment of domestic prominent influential persons, DPIPs, and related parties. Eskom failed to comply with these rules, leading to a series of extensions granted by the JSE. Despite these extensions, Eskom did not meet the deadlines to publish the required policies and registers on its website. Now to sports. The Tigers of Nigeria are set to face the US in the women's basketball quarterfinals at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Led by Rena Wakama, Nigeria achieved its first ever Olympic quarterfinal berth after a 79-70 victory over Canada in their final group match. Despite leading Group B initially, they fell to third place following Australia's 79-72 win over France. Now, Nigeria will now play against the defending champions, the US, on August 7 at 8:30 p.m. This will be their second Olympic clash following a 9-point loss in Tokyo and a heavy defeat in the 2024 qualifiers. The other quarterfinal matchups are Serbia versus Australia, Spain versus Belgium, and France versus Germany. Still in sports, Ezekiel Nathaniel made a promising start in his quest for an Olympic podium by advancing to the semi-finals of the men's 400-meter hurdles. The 21-year-old Nigerian athlete finished second in his heat with a time of 48.38 seconds. He secured an automatic spot in the semi-finals behind Jamaica's Roshan Clark, who clocked 48.17 seconds, and ahead of Kenya's Wise Man Mukobe, who recorded 48 minutes 58 seconds. Nathaniel's performance marks the first time in 12 years that a Nigerian athlete has reached a 400-meter hurdle semi-finals at the Olympics. However, he would need to improve his time, as he currently has the 6th best time overall, with Norway's Karsten Wallum leading at 47.47 seconds. Now, Nigerian midfielder Regina Otu has signed a 2-year contract with Fenerbahce, joining the Turkish women's top flight team for the 2024-2025 season. The 28-year-old Super Falcons player left French side Saint Etienne at the end of last season, where she helped the team secure promotion to France's top division. Otu previously played for Rivers Angels in Nigeria before moving abroad to FK Minsk in Belarus, where she was teammate with Onome Ebi. She later spent 2 seasons with Saint Etienne in both D1 Arkema and the women's 2nd division. Otu now joins several other Nigerian players in the Turkish league, including Glory Ogbonna, Blessing Nkor, and Alice Ogebe. And now to entertainment. Nigeria's social media personality Idris Okuneye, also known as Bobrisky, has been released from Kirikiri Correctional Center. According to information obtained by News Central, Okuneye was released this morning, earlier than scheduled. His release is coming 5 months after being convicted by a federal high court in Lagos for mutilating Naira notes. Following his release, videos surfaced of Okuneye with friends, including Nollywood actress Eniola Ajao and fashion designer CEO Lumini. Okuneye had pleaded guilty to 4 counts of Naira abuse brought by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission before Justice A.O. Awoboro of the Federal High Court in Lagos. And that's all we have on the news at this hour. But before we go, let's take another look at some of our major stories. Now, we told you that the hashtag End Bad Governance protest continues on day 5 after President Tinubu's speech to the nation. We also did mention that Nigeria's federal government issues travel alerts to Nigerians over violence in the UK. And finally, Mali breaks off diplomatic relations with Ukraine. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. Also follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, StarTimes channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Blessings Mosugu.